Quiet down, Cowboy. You're half frozen. Tonight you're sleeping between us, the two sisters said. Before the story unfolds, don't forget to hit, like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Utah Territory, winter of 1877. The wind cut hard through the canyon like a blade. It didn't howl, just kept moving. Cold, steady, merciless. It slipped between the rock walls, whipping snow and dust into tight spirals that stung the eyes and blurred the trail ahead. Eli Boone had lost track of time somewhere after the second night without a fire. He'd been tracking a lead, his horse stolen near Green Creek, maybe by a desperate soul, maybe by a thief. But the storm had wiped every sign clean. Now he moved on instinct alone. The canyon tightened around him, pushing him deeper into its throat where the wind hit harder and the cliffs rose like walls. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His canteen had frozen stiff that morning. The heel of his left boot had split open yesterday, and he'd wrapped it with strips torn from his own shirt. The wound in his shoulder, crudely stitched with fishing line, had bled through again. The pain had dulled, and that scared him more than the pain itself. 3 fingers had gone numb. He hadn't figured he'd die in a place like this, but death was coming fast. Every blink made the snow feel closer, like it was swallowing the world whole. Each step took more effort than the last. His thoughts drifted, snagging on old memories, names long gone, places buried, a woman's face, a ridge where he once delivered word of a ceasefire 2 days too late. He pushed it away. Just make it through. Just reach the far side. But he didn't. His boots struck uneven ground. Rock or ice, he couldn't tell. His balance gave way. He went down hard, knees first, then shoulder, then chest, hitting the frozen earth. He didn't try to rise. The cold wasn't sharp anymore. It had turned soft. Quiet. He thought about crawling. Didn't. His eyes closed. His hand slipped from the pistol at his side. Sihara was already crouched when her sister reached her. She had spotted him from above, a dark shape in the snow, still but not yet stiff. Her knife was in hand, though she hadn't touched him. Her breathing stayed slow, controlled. She didn't like how close he was to their path. "Why'd he stop here?" Nayeli asked from behind, her voice tight from the climb. "He didn't stop," Sihara said. "He fell." Nayeli studied the man. Worn coat, torn boot, blood soaking the shoulder, lips blue, pale as death, armed, barely alive. She watched him another moment, then scanned the canyon walls. "Alone? Looks like it." They stayed still for a long moment. Neither of them trusted luck. Sihara's right hand stayed tucked beneath her coat. It had never healed right. Burned years ago when a deal turned bad, when she reached too fast and paid for it in fire. Her left hand moved instead, brushing snow from the man's face. His skin was cold, too pale. She pressed her fingers to his neck. "Still breathing." "Not for long," Nayeli said. "That shoulder's gone bad. Leave him, it'll kill him faster." Nayeli frowned. Her left leg dragged slightly as she knelt. A musket ball had torn through it when she was 17. It never healed right. Pain was something she carried now. She looked at her sister. "Let's not argue out in the open wind." Sihara didn't answer. She had already grabbed the man's arm. Together they dragged him. He let out one low groan. Nothing more. Their shelter was hidden beneath a broken ledge, tucked behind a scatter of rocks that looked like nothing worth noticing. Inside, they had lined the space with thick hides, shaping the dirt floor to drain meltwater away from where they slept. It wasn't much, but it held heat when the fire stayed alive. They pulled him inside. Sihara sealed the entrance with the stone slab. The difference in air hit immediately, still cold, but no longer deadly. They laid him on the center hide. His coat had frozen stiff. Sihara cut it away. Her hands moved fast, careful. The wound on his shoulder was worse up close, angry, infected. "Get the fire going," she said quietly. She didn't need to raise her voice. Nayeli was already moving. She pulled flint from the clay bowl buried in the corner. Soon sparks caught the dry moss. Then came the sticks. Then the smell of burning wood. Sihara stripped the man's shirt and placed her hand against his chest. His heart still beat. Slow, but there. "We need to get heat back into him or he won't make it," she said low. Nayeli glanced over. "You planning to waste more blankets?" "He won't see sunrise if we don't." Nayeli paused. Her face tightened. Doubt, irritation, then a hard decision settling in. She rose, stripped off her outer skirt, and tossed it toward the bedding. "This ain't for him," she muttered. "Didn't say it was," Sihara replied. They pulled the hides close, layering thick furs over the stones they had warmed by the fire pit. Sihara slid beneath first, moving slow, her body still stiff from the cold outside. Nayeli followed, settling on the other side of the man. He didn't react. "He don't smell like a soldier," Nayeli said quietly. "Too rough for a scout. Maybe a runner, courier type." Sihara didn't answer. Her face stayed still in the flicker of the firelight. Her thoughts never ran straight like other people's. "He's shaking. He will be for a while." Nayeli looked across him at her sister. "We don't know who he is." "We will." "You think he'll stick around?" A man with nowhere else goes nowhere. They stayed like that, all three beneath the same cover. The warmth came back slow, not comfort, just survival. No one spoke again that night. But come morning, the man's eyes opened. Stone overhead, the soft scrape of steel against wood, the smell of bones boiling over flame. And for the first time in days, his mind stayed still. He knew where he was, and he stayed. Eli Boone woke without knowing how he got there. The air didn't bite anymore. That was the first thing he noticed. The cold had backed off, not gone, but no longer tearing at him. Something heavy rested on his chest. Hide. Warmth. Weight. His fingers twitched against the packed dirt beneath him. The fire cracked softly nearby. He turned his head slow. The movement pulled at his shoulder. Pain surged back, deep, burning. Fresh blood had seeped into the bandage. Someone had rewrapped it. He forced his eyes open wider. Dim firelight danced across the walls. Stretched hides lined the stone, stitched and patched with sinew. A crude tripod stood over the coals, a clay pot hanging low. The air smelled of bone broth and smoke. He wasn't alone. To his left, a woman sat cross-legged, a blade resting in her lap. She wasn't looking at him, but he knew she'd noticed. Her coat was heavy, sewn from worn deer hide, fur lining the collar. Her black hair was tied back in a braid. Her right hand rested near her thigh, scarred, twisted, barely useful. Sihara. He didn't know her name yet, but he studied her movements, steady, deliberate. She drew the blade across a whetstone in slow, even strokes. Not because it needed sharpening, but because it gave her control. On his right, another figure shifted. The younger one. Softer face, sharper eyes. A loose tunic hung from her frame, a wrap tied tight around her left leg. He hadn't noticed the limp until she stood, bracing herself against the rock wall. Her eyes locked onto him, arms folded. "Well, you ain't dead," she said flat. Eli didn't answer. His throat felt like sand. He tried to sit up, Her hand shot out, pressing him back down. "Don't be stupid," she said. "You busted your stitches. Again." He looked at her, just for a second. "You remember anything?" she asked. He shook his head once. "Snow. Canyon. Dying. Yeah, you dropped." He tried to speak again. Nothing came. He gestured weakly toward his side, his coat, his belt, his gun. "Still there," she said. "We didn't take your things." Then, after a beat, "Not like they're worth much right now." Sihara didn't even glance up. She kept working the blade. Nayeli stepped closer, dragging a crate toward the fire. She grabbed a wooden bowl and dipped it into the pot. "Eat. You look like hell." Eli took it with both hands. His grip barely held. The broth was thin but hot. He drank slow. Each swallow burned, but he kept going. The silence stretched out. No one broke it. After a while, Nayeli sat across from him, watching his face. "What were you doing out there?" His lips cracked as he answered. "Tracking a horse." "Yours?" "Yeah." "Stolen?" He nodded. "You find it?" "No." "Then you're worse at tracking than you look." He didn't answer. Just kept drinking. She studied him a moment longer, then leaned back, resting on one arm. "You Army?" "Used to be." "You kill Apache?" He didn't flinch. "No." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." She stared hard, then glanced at Sihara. "He says he didn't." Sihara finally lifted her eyes. They met his. Steady, cold, not cruel, just worn from too many lies. Eli held it. "Scout, courier, not cavalry," he said. "I carried messages, didn't shoot people." Sihara said nothing, but she didn't push him either. That was enough. Nayeli stood. "We got rules here. You stay, you follow them." "I didn't ask to stay." "You're breathing," she shot back. "That's enough." Then she laid them out, flat and simple. "No fire after dark unless we say so. No stepping outside unless we say so. No grabbing anything sharp unless we hand it to you. And if you go out, you tell one of us first." Eli's eyes drifted to the slab sealing the entrance. No latch, no grip, just stone pressed tight against stone. "You're shut in," Nayeli added. "For now." Sihara rose then, slower than her sister, but taller. She crossed to the wall, picked up a folded hide, and dropped it beside the fire. "You sleep there?" she said quietly. Eli finished the last of the broth. His hand trembled as he lowered the bowl. "You got a name?" Nayeli asked. "Eli Boone." She tipped her head. "You don't sound Southern." "Born back east, rode west." "For what?" He didn't answer. Nayeli watched him a second longer, then turned and limped to the corner where tools lay wrapped in cloth. She started sorting them. Awls, thread, bone needles, things that didn't ask questions. Eli pulled the blanket tighter around himself. His body hurt in places he hadn't noticed before. The fire cracked behind him. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the rock. He didn't know if he'd been saved or trapped, but one thing was certain. They hadn't killed him, and he wasn't ready to leave. By the third morning, Eli could stand on his own. Not long, not steady, but upright. The blanket slipped from his shoulders as he moved toward the back wall. One hand braced against the rock, his shoulder pulled tight, pain sharp but clean. He glanced down at the fresh bandage, better than his own work, tighter, done with care. He didn't remember who had fixed it. Smoke hung low near the ceiling. The fire had burned through the night again. Someone had fed it quietly while he slept, maybe more than once. The heat wasn't strong, but it held. Nayeli crouched by the fire pit, scraping something into a bowl. Her hair was tied up now, loose strands clinging to her cheek. A thin scar traced along her jaw, old, pale, almost hidden. "You're moving," she said without looking up. "Barely." "Still better than yesterday." He eased himself down beside the stone shelf they used for storage. His legs shook. He sat still, hands resting on his knees. A moment later, Sihara stepped in from outside, a strip of raw hide in one hand, a small pouch in the other. Snow dusted her coat. She sealed the stone door behind her, wiped her boots, and moved to the wall. Neither sister spoke right away. They didn't need to. Work came first. Eli watched in silence. Sihara poured crushed herbs into a bowl, her movements exact. Her left hand measured, her burned right steadied the rim. Nayeli stirred a thick paste in a clay pot, careful not to let it burn. Eli cleared his throat. "Got anything I can do?" Nayeli let out a short breath. "You walk like a newborn colt. Got hands, though?" Sihara glanced over her shoulder. Her face didn't change, but she nodded once towards the back corner. "Traps need checking," she said. "Rabbit line past the hollow." "Can't run," he muttered. "Then walk." She didn't wait for an answer. Outside, the air cut through the canyon like a blade that never dulled. Snow crunched under each step. The traps were small wire snares, set low along a narrow rabbit trail behind the brush. The sisters had placed them deep, far from the main path, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Eli found two sprung, one empty. The other held a rabbit, stiff, lifeless. He crouched, cut the wire loose with his pocket blade. His fingers were slow but steady. The motion came back to him. Simple work steadied his mind, brought things into focus. When he returned, he set the rabbit by the fire without a word. Nayeli raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Later, she tossed him a pile of torn hides. "Fix them. If you can't sew, don't bother." Eli handled the needle awkwardly at first, but his stitches held. Not perfect, but solid. He took his time. Nayeli leaned over once to check. She gave a short grunt. "No gaps. You've done this before. Army gear, saddles. Guess you're worth something then." That was as close to praise as she got. By nightfall, Eli had hauled in 4 logs, cleaned 2 blades, and stacked dry moss near the fire. His legs burned, his shoulder throbbed, but he never asked to stop. Sihara handed him a half cup of boiled water. Warm. Not hot. "You're slower than us," she said. "Not trying to impress you." "Good." Nayeli finished tying a bundle of herbs to hang near the ceiling, then dropped down beside the fire. She pulled a blanket over her legs and began picking seeds from a dried gourd. She didn't look at Eli when she asked it. "You ever had a woman?" He didn't answer right off. The silence didn't seem to bother her any. "Had," he said at last. "She leave?" "Didn't get the chance." Sihara turned away, packing up the leftover paste without a word. She didn't ask anything further. Nayeli spoke again. "So what now?" "Was tracking my horse. Figured I'd find somewhere warm to last a while. You found one." Eli let out a quiet breath through his nose. "You always talk this much?" Nayeli's mouth shifted into something between a shrug and a crooked grin. "Only when I ain't got anything better to do." He leaned back against the rock wall and closed his eyes for a moment. The air inside felt warmer now. The logs he'd hauled in burned steady. He hadn't been asked to stay. He hadn't earned their trust, but they'd let him work. That counted for more than most places ever gave a man. That night, when he spread out his blanket, nobody told him to move. The fire stayed alive. The door stayed unsealed. And for the first time in months, Eli Boone slept without his hand wrapped around a gun. Eli woke before either of the sisters stirred. The air in the shelter felt thick, stale from smoke and breath, but a faint draft slipped through the cracks overhead. He pushed himself up slow, easier than the day before, without that sharp bite of pain. His boots sat by the fire, where Nayeli must have left them to dry. He didn't remember taking them off. He pulled them on and stepped outside. Fresh snow covered the ground, light, untouched. The canyon lay quiet. Pale light stretched across the rock walls, not quite sunrise, but close enough. The sky held that washed-out blue that never lasted long. He stepped off the ledge and studied the ridge above. His instincts had come back. He wasn't just getting by anymore. He was thinking again. Nayeli found him crouched near a trail sign, 2 stones stacked under a bent branch. "You're up early," she said. Her voice carried no edge, just dry observation. "Needed some air." She glanced down at the tracks. Rabbit, maybe, or lynx. Too wide for rabbit. Front prints cut deep. "You hunt?" He stood. "Used to track men. Animals are easier." She smirked faintly, then turned back toward the shelter. "We need meat. Roof's holding. I'm coming with you." He hesitated. Shouldn't leave Sihara alone. She'll say if she needs us. They moved out without another word. Eli took the lead, Nayeli a few steps behind. Her limp shifted her weight, but it didn't slow her pace any. She carried a short bow wrapped in leather. Eli had a small hatchet at his belt, his pistol resting in its holster. The snow swallowed every sound. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Nayeli broke it first. "Why'd you stop tracking your horse?" Storm wiped the trail. "You sure that's all?" He gave a small nod. She kicked at a root poking through the snow. "You lose something else out there?" He didn't answer right away. "My brother was like that," she said. "Shut himself off after he got separated. Didn't say a word for 3 months. Thought staying quiet made him strong." Eli looked at her. "It don't. Not always." He didn't say more. She didn't press him. They reached the bend where the old snares ran. Several traps had been disturbed. One was missing entirely. Fresh tracks cut along the edge. Deep impressions, bare feet, long stride. Recent. "Someone's been through here," Eli said. Nayeli's eyes narrowed. "No one travels this deep." He crouched, studying the marks. Not a man. Then what? A woman. Light steps. Worn down. Barefoot. Nayeli stiffened. "You sure? No tribe sends runners out like that in winter." He shook his head slightly. "I don't think she's got a tribe anymore." They exchanged a look. Nayeli tightened her grip on the bow. "Sihara needs to hear this." Eli nodded. "You head back. I'll follow the trail." "I'm not letting you go alone." "You'll slow me down." He said it flat. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. He wasn't wrong. Eli pointed toward a ridge line. "If I ain't back in an hour, get Sihara." She gave a short nod, then turned and started back. Eli moved the opposite way, slower now, careful. The tracks cut toward the river, weaving through brush. Whoever had made them wasn't walking straight. The tracks looped and doubled back on themselves, wandering without direction. Eli found crushed reeds near the bank. Signs someone had rested there, maybe through the night. No fire, no shelter, just the cold. Then he saw her. A shape tucked behind a patch of brush, curled in on itself, barely moving. He stepped closer, slow, careful, hands where she could see them. "Ma'am," he called quietly. No answer. He crouched beside her. Her heels were split open from the cold, her skirt torn, her face hidden behind tangled hair. She was breathing. That was something. He didn't reach for her, just waited. A long minute passed. Then her fingers twitched. Eli stood, shrugged off his coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come on," he said under his breath. She didn't fight him. By the time they made it back, Sihara already had the fire burning strong. Nayeli stood by the entrance, bow still gripped tight. Sihara took one look and didn't ask a single question. She pulled down a fur, cleared space beside the fire. They laid the girl there. She was young, 17, maybe, markings along her shoulder, bruises darkening her ribs, cuts circling her ankles. "Someone left her out to die," Nayeli said. Eli didn't answer. He brushed the snow off his hands and leaned back, watching as Sihara checked the girl's pulse, then pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. No one said what they were all thinking. They just moved, did what needed doing. That night, there were 4 bodies in that shelter, and one of them didn't belong there. The girl never woke. Her breathing stayed shallow, uneven. Even buried under layers of fur, she shivered. Sihara didn't leave her side, checking her warmth with her hands, touching water to her lips, watching every breath. She didn't speak once. Nayeli sat across the fire, arms wrapped tight around her knees, eyes locked in place. Eli stayed near the wall. He didn't step in. He knew better. He'd seen it before. People dragged too far through cold and hunger. When they came back, it wasn't always clean. Sometimes, they didn't come back at all. No one spoke until the fire burned low. Nayeli broke it first. "She's marked." Sihara gave a small nod. "Branded. Still fresh." Eli shifted slightly. He hadn't noticed before. "Traitors?" "Could be," Nayeli muttered. "Or local militia. Some of them mark runaways. Make an example out of them." "She's too young," Eli said. Sihara's voice came flat. That never stopped anyone. The silence that followed stayed heavy. Morning came with a sound, thin, broken, a voice trying to exist. Eli was on his feet first, Nayeli right behind him. The girl had pushed herself upright, barely holding it together. Her face was hollow, lips cracked, eyes wide and sharp with fear. She looked at all 3 of them, then toward the door. Like she was waiting to run, Sihara crouched by the fire, poured a small bowl of broth, and slid it across the ground without saying a word. The girl didn't touch it. Nayeli stepped closer. "You ain't a prisoner." "Nothing. We didn't bring you here to hurt you." The girl's gaze dropped to her ankle. The bruises there had darkened, swollen. Eli stayed near the entrance, giving space. "You can talk?" Nayeli asked, softer now. A small nod. "What's your name?" Silence. Nayeli tried again, this time in a softer Apache tongue. Still nothing. Just a slow shake of the head. Sihara stepped forward, laid a blanket over the girl's legs, then rose again. She glanced at the others. "She'll speak when she's ready." By midday, the girl had managed 2 small sips of broth before curling back beneath the furs. She didn't sleep, just watched. Every corner, every shadow. Eli stepped outside and took to splitting wood. The wind had come back, colder than before. He worked in silence, steady rhythm, the blade rising and falling. It helped him think. He didn't know what they were now. 3 people surviving was one thing, adding another, wounded, hunted, broken, changed everything. When he stepped back inside, Sihara was stitching along the girl's sleeve. Nayeli stood near the fire, boiling water again. Neither looked up. Eli sat, pulled off his boots. "I'll head downriver tomorrow." Sihara glanced at him. "Why?" "Check for movement. If someone's tracking her, they won't be far." Nayeli shook her head slightly. "If they marked her, they ain't done with her. Men like that don't let go easy." "Then I need to know which way they're riding." No one argued that. That night, the girl finally spoke. Nayeli had just settled down, fixing the torn binding on her old journal. The fire burned low. Sihara had already turned in, lying with her back to the rest of them. Eli sat nearby, working a needle through a split seam in his coat, fingers stiff from the cold. The voice came soft, barely there. "My name's Zouri." Nayeli froze, looked up slow. Zouri didn't meet anyone's eyes. "They dragged me out of the river, 2 days east of here," she said, voice thin. "Said I wasn't worth keeping. Left me tied in the snow." Nayeli shifted closer, careful, quiet. She didn't cut in. "They took my brother, a month before that," Zouri went on. "I haven't seen Takai since." Eli stayed still, listening. Zouri wiped her face with the back of her wrist, then pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I didn't think anyone would come." No one moved to comfort her. From her bedroll, Sihara spoke, voice low but steady. "We don't leave people behind." Zouri looked toward her, eyes blinking hard against something she wasn't ready to show. Nayeli leaned back on her heels. "Tomorrow, you tell us everything you remember. Names, faces, anything that tells us what's coming." Zouri gave the smallest nod. Eli stood, nudged the fire with a stick, sparks rising. No one said another word, but the air had shifted. There was a name now, a voice, a fourth place by the fire. And that meant none of them were leaving alone anymore. Snow came down hard that night, heavier than before. It covered the canyon, softened every edge, buried every track. Inside, they kept the fire low. Sihara sealed the smoke path with flat stones. The shelter held warmth, but just enough. At first light, Eli dressed in silence. He strapped his holster back into place, checked the cylinder, tied extra rounds into a pouch at his belt. Nayeli handed him dried meat and a small flask. No thanks passed between them. Zouri was still asleep, curled tight against the wall, one arm under her head, the other across her chest like she was holding on to something that wasn't there. Sihara stood nearby, arms crossed, face unreadable. Eli paused at the door. "I won't be long." Sihara gave a small nod. "You see anyone? You don't get close. If I ain't back by dusk, we'll handle it." He pulled the stone aside and stepped out into the cold. The trail followed the river, narrow and sharp. Eli stayed close to the cliff face, boots sinking into loose powder. He moved quiet, stopping now and then, not to listen for noise, but for the absence of it. After a mile, he froze. Tracks, fresh, not moccasins, boots, clean edges, purposeful stride. 3 men, maybe more, heading west. He crouched near a birch, eyes scanning the ridge above. Nothing moved, then faint, metal tapping somewhere far off. Horses, no shoes. He backed away slow, leaving the trail untouched. Whoever they were, they'd passed close. Close enough to matter. Not close enough to find them. Not yet. Back at the shelter, the women were already working. Nayeli had Zouri outside near the stone basin, showing her how to strip bark from pine branches. Zouri moved stiff, but she watched everything. Didn't speak. Didn't resist. Eli appeared on the ridge, raised a hand. Nayeli saw it. Nodded once. kept working. He made his way down careful, brushing frost from the brush as he passed. When he reached them, Zouri looked up. "They're coming?" "Not yet," Eli said, "but close enough to smell smoke if we're careless." Zouri's hands dropped to her sides. She didn't shake, but her jaw tightened. "We should leave." Eli shook his head. "Not yet." Inside, Sihara was cutting strips of meat for drying. Her hands moved quicker than usual, tighter. Eli stepped in. Didn't need to speak. "How many?" she asked. "3, at least." She folded the meat without a word. Nayeli came in behind him. "If they get too close, we don't wait for them to knock," Sihara said. Eli crouched by the fire. "No dogs, no lanterns. They're scouting, not hunting." "For now," Nayeli muttered, "that'll change if they catch a trail. We cover ours better." She pulled spare hides from the wall and started packing. Zouri stood in the corner, arms wrapped around herself. "I can help," she said quietly. Nayeli looked at her, then gave a short nod. They worked until the light faded. Eli masked the outer trail with brush. Sihara moved supplies deeper into a hidden chamber. Nayeli sealed the chimney with fresh mud to choke the smoke. By nightfall, everything was tighter, cleaner, hidden. They sat near the hearth, saying nothing. The fire burned low, and none of them slept easy. Zouri leaned into Nayeli's shoulder for the first time. Eli sat across from them, checking his pistol again, slow and deliberate. Sihara stared into the fire, eyes distant. They weren't family, not by blood, but whatever they had become, they understood one thing clear as day. If those men came back, none of them would be taken. Not again. Not from here. By mid-morning, the wind returned. Not fierce, but steady enough to scrape ice from the canyon walls and push cold through every crack of the shelter. The stone slab at the entrance had frozen solid overnight. It took Eli 2 tries to pry it loose, and the sound carried farther than he liked. He stepped out, scanned the ridge, then the trail toward the stream. Nothing moved. No birds, no tracks. He stood there a full minute longer before heading down the slope. Behind him, the others had already started moving. Nayeli carried a pail, heading toward a patch of rock where sunlight melted ice into water. Zouri followed, favoring her step, wrapped in one of Sihara's coats. Too big, sleeves patched and worn. She said nothing, but her eyes stayed on the horizon, even while her hands worked. Inside, Sihara laid out strips of bark and pine gum, sealing the cracks in the ceiling. They had just enough fat left to coat the stone once more, maybe twice if they stretched it. She worked fast, shoulders tight, her burned hand braced against the wall. By now they all knew the rhythm. No one asked what needed doing. They prepared in silence, because it wasn't a question of if anymore. It was when. By noon, the sun crested the eastern ridge. Snow softened underfoot, breaking with each step. Eli had circled up to the northern rise. From there, he could see the open trail, the one they'd left uncovered on purpose. A false path. Bait. He saw them just before the wind shifted. 3 riders, no colors, no flags, heavy builds, long rifles tied to their saddles. Their horses moved slow, not tired, just patient. These weren't men chasing. They were waiting to be seen. Eli dropped low behind the ridge, moving along the rock face, boots leaving no trace in the frozen ground. By the time he reached the hollow, the bottom of his coat was soaked through. Inside, Sihara looked up once. "They're close." Eli didn't answer right away, just nodded, setting his canteen down near the fire. Nayeli rose. How far? Stopped near the clearing. Watching. He paused. Might be looking for her. Or me. Zouri had gone still at the sound of his return. Now she stepped forward. I know one of them, she said. The man on the black horse. His name's Silas Crow. He was there when I ran. You sure? Yes. Her voice cracked. Scar under his chin, silver ring on his right hand. Eli sat on the edge of the bedroll. What does he want? Zouri looked down. Control. That afternoon, they made a plan. Nayeli set a tripwire along the northern trail. Bells, bits of tin, anything that would strike stone and carry sound. Sihara had Eli dig a second stash pit beneath the fire. Shallow, but enough to hide dried meat, flint, and half a flask of clean water. Enough to disappear for a day, maybe two. Zouri insisted on helping. She limped beside Nayeli, dragging brush behind them to erase their tracks. She didn't say much, but her hands never stopped moving. By sunset, everything inside the shelter had been tightened down. No loose tools, no noise, no signs of life near the chimney. They kept the fire low, then let it die. Night came fast, and it didn't come alone. A sharp rattle cut through the dark just after moonrise. The bell. Eli had his pistol in hand before the echo faded. He was already at the door when Sihara stepped in beside him, bow drawn. No words passed between them. He eased the stone open just enough to see. A shadow moved across the snow. Slow, deliberate. Then another. Closer now. Then a voice. We don't want trouble. It was smooth, calm, the kind of voice that carried confidence without raising itself. We're tracking a thief, the man called out. An Apache girl. Took something that ain't hers. Zouri went rigid in the corner. Nayeli placed a hand on her shoulder. You hand her over, the voice continued, and we walk away quiet. No one moved. We don't have her, Eli said, his voice flat. A pause, then, I've seen your tracks, 4 of you now. Don't mean one of you didn't leave. Silence. Then the man spoke again, softer this time. You sound like a man who's been alone too long. Eli didn't answer. You got one chance, the voice said. We'll be back tomorrow. If you're still here tomorrow, we'll take that as you hiding fugitives. Eli leaned forward, his finger settling lightly against the trigger. His eyes stayed locked on the darkness beyond the door. You done? He asked, voice low. A soft chuckle came back. You'll know when I am. Then footsteps, retreating. 3 sets. The horses never moved. Eli waited until the last shadow slipped behind the rocks before sealing the stone shut again. Inside, Nayeli stood with her back to the fire pit. Sihara sat beside the closed chimney. Zouri hadn't moved. He'll come back, she whispered. Eli holstered the pistol. We won't be here. Sihara looked at him. You sure? They want her alive. That buys us time. Nayeli stepped forward. Where do we go? Eli bent down, grabbing his coat. There's a draw 2 miles north. Old coal chute. Collapsed years ago. No one checks it in winter. Sihara nodded once, slow. We move before first light, Eli said. Zouri spoke again, steadier now. What if they catch us? Eli looked at her, then at the others. They won't. And in that moment, something shifted. They didn't look at him like a stranger anymore, not even a guest. They looked at him like someone who wasn't leaving. By the time the first gray light touched the canyon, the fire was dead and the shelter stripped clean. Every hide folded, every tool packed, no trace left behind. Nayeli's idea. They left a broken snare by the entrance, a sign. No one made it out alive. They moved on foot. No horses, no lanterns, just layers of cloth, a bundle of food, and quiet urgency. Eli led. Sihara followed, knife at her thigh, one hand steadying Zouri as they moved. Nayeli brought up the rear, watching the trail behind them with every turn. No one spoke. Words cost heat, time, breath. Out here, survival meant movement. The draw sat north of the hollow, hidden between two limestone cliffs untouched for decades. An old coal run once passed through it, back when the mines still paid. Then floods came, burying half the shaft and breaking the ridge above. Eli had found it the spring before, searching for water. He hadn't told anyone. Not until now. The entrance looked like nothing, just a dip in the ground between two dead trees, covered by a fallen branch and a scatter of leaves. He pulled back a piece of canvas he'd hidden months ago. Behind it, barely visible, a narrow opening in the stone. "Keep low," he said. "Tight at the start." Sihara went in first, Zouri behind her, then Nayeli. Eli followed last, dragging brush and debris over the opening as he slipped inside. The passage widened just enough for them to sit, shoulder to shoulder. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of coal and old ash. A thin line of light slipped through a crack overhead. Enough to see, not enough to give them away. No one spoke until the last echo outside was gone. Hours passed. They shared bread. Nothing more. Sihara ate slow, eyes never leaving the narrow slit of light. Nayeli sharpened the same arrowhead again and again, a habit she used when she needed to stay steady. Zouri sat curled beneath a blanket, arms wrapped tight around her knees, eyes flicking at every sound. Eli leaned close to the wall, listening. Twice he heard horses. Once, voices. None came close. Late afternoon, Zouri finally broke the silence. "Why'd you come back for me?" Eli didn't answer. Nayeli looked up from her work. "Because we've all been left behind once." Zouri nodded, slow. Sihara turned toward her. "You see something like that again? You don't wait, you move." "I couldn't walk," Zouri said. "Then crawl." There was no anger in her voice, just truth. Zouri didn't argue. "I didn't think anyone would find me." "You were wrong." Cold crept back in after sunset. No fire this time. They sat close, sharing what little warmth they had. Their breath hung in the air, thick in the narrow space. Eli leaned against the wall, pistol resting across his lap. His shoulder ached, old wound stiff in the cold. But he didn't shift. His ears tracked every change in the wind. Sihara pulled her coat tighter. Nayeli slipped off her boots, rubbing feeling back into her toes before pulling them on again. Zouri rested her head against Eli's arm without asking. He didn't pull away. Near midnight, it came again. Voices. Faint this time, carried and twisted by the canyon. Eli raised a hand. Silence. They all froze. Fragments reached them. Nothing clear. Tracks, maybe doubled back. Then quiet. Then hooves. Distant. Fading. Sihara whispered, "They're heading east." Eli gave a small nod. "We wait till morning." Nayeli leaned back against the cold stone. "If they're gone." No one answered. Morning brought snow again. Light at first, then heavy. By midday, it blinded the canyon. Eli used it. He led them back out, not toward the old shelter but farther north, deeper into the upper ravine, where the trees grew thick and the wind lost its bite. Among the pines, Eli came to a stop. "We build here." Nayeli turned toward him. "There's no shelter." "Then we make one." Sihara dropped her bundle. "We've got the tools." Zouri pulled the canvas from her back. "And a reason." That was enough. They went to work. Eli cut branches. Sihara shaped the frame, weaving supports with steady hands. Nayeli lashed beams together using sinew pulled from old snare lines. Zuni cleared the snow, her hands red and raw, but she didn't slow down. By sunset, the structure stood, covered in hides, braced with stone. Inside, it didn't leak, didn't creak. It wasn't pretty, but it held. That night, with the wind roaring high above the trees, the four of them sat inside. Not as fugitives, not as strays, as something built, not broken. Zuni handed Eli a strip of bark, something carved into it, her name. He turned it over in his hands for a long time, then tied it to the center beam. Sihara watched. Nayeli smiled. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. This wasn't temporary. By early spring, the worst of the storms had passed. Eli stood on the ridge above the cabin, sleeves rolled, hands rough and scarred from work, watching the last of the frost melt from the trees. Smoke rose straight from the chimney into a clear sky. No more hiding. No more waiting. A full winter had come and gone since they left the hollow. No one had come looking. The shelter they built still stood strong. The roof held. The walls, reinforced with pine beams from the ridge, didn't shift. A trench ran behind it now, guiding meltwater away from the door, carved over 2 long days through frozen ground. A fire pit sat off to the side, open to the wind, where they cooked when the weather allowed. Tools hung neatly from hooks Eli had carved. Everything had its place. Inside, the air carried the smell of smoke, fresh bread, and pine resin. That morning, Zuni had gone to the stream alone. She didn't ask any more. Her limp was still there, but she was stronger now, steadier. She carried a small hunting knife, Sihara's old one. Not a gift, just passed on because it fit her hand. Nayeli had taken charge of the drying racks, marking time by the spread of moss along the southern rocks. She'd claimed a patch of ground for herbs, coaxing life from frozen soil with ash and crushed bone. She said it wasn't farming, just survival. With rhythm. Sihara didn't leave the ridge much anymore. She worked hides, cutting and stretching them until she could judge thickness by feel alone. She still didn't speak much, but sometimes, when she worked, she hummed. Low, quiet, without tune. It made the place feel different. Less like somewhere you wait to leave. More like somewhere you belong. Eli hadn't meant to stay, but the thought of leaving never came back. That evening, as the last light settled over the western ridge, Eli worked on a cracked beam above the door. Nayeli passed behind him, a basket of roots in her arms. "Roof's still crooked," she muttered. "It holds," he said. She paused. "So do you." He glanced at her, one brow raised. She rolled her eyes. That was a compliment. Noted. She kept walking. Inside, Zuni had already set out the bowls for supper. Sihara handed her a cloth to dry them. No words passed. They didn't need them. Eli stepped in last. The fire burned low. Bread rested on a flat stone near the coals. And in the pot, rabbit stew, thick with whatever Nayeli had managed to pull from the stubborn earth. Salt was running low, but they made do with what they had. They ate without speaking. Not out of tension, not out of distance, just something steady, settled. Later, Sihara pulled another hide across the window. The wind had changed. These days, it carried more rain than snow. Eli checked the door latch. Nayeli stirred the embers, then tossed in a strip of dry bark with her initials carved into the edge. It flared brighter than expected. Zuni laughed. The sound caught even her off guard. She covered her mouth, but Nayeli nudged her lightly. "Too late, it's already out." Sihara let the faintest smile slip. Just once, quick as a flicker of flame. Eli glanced around the cabin. Something had shifted. This wasn't about danger anymore. Not about running. Not about hiding. They weren't surviving the canyon. They were living in it. Together. A week later, Eli rode out to check the trap lines. The horse beneath him, a wild one Nayeli had broken, moved smooth and sure. He came back by sundown. No one asked where he'd been. He left his boots at the door, took a seat by the fire, and handed the extra meat to Zuni. "We'll dry it tomorrow," she said. "Up to you," he answered. She smiled. The next morning, Eli carved something into the beam above the doorway. 4 lines, no names, no symbols, just marks. One for each of them. Sihara saw it first. She didn't say anything. Just placed her hand over the 4th mark, held it there for a moment, then stepped back inside. That evening, the wind fell away completely. The sky held a strange stillness, the kind that came after long storms finally broke. The fire outside burned low. Nayeli sharpened a blade. Zuni braided strips of dry grass into rope. Sihara sat with her back against the post, eyes half closed, working a torn piece of leather between her fingers. Eli sat in the doorway, legs stretched out, watching the last light fade across the ridge. No one spoke much, but no one moved far either, not because they had to, because they chose to. They had become something steady, something unnamed but unbreakable, built without promises, held together without words. That night, they slept beneath the same roof. Their breathing rose and fell in quiet rhythm. And in the dark, Zuni whispered softly toward the beam, "We never left." Half awake, Eli answered, voice low, "We never will."